Thank you, Mania. Welcome everyone to today's special episode of People of the Pod. I'm sitting here in our office near the Eiffel Tower for a special and unique conversation between Ted Deutch, AJC CEO, and Bernard-Henri Lévy, one of the most, if not the most prominent French philosopher and public intellectuals. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Hello.
Today, we will speak about loneliness. The loneliness of the Jewish people in Israel, the explosion of anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States, the attacks on Israel from multiple fronts since October 7th. We will also speak about the loneliness of Western democracies more broadly, the consequences of the US elections and the future for Ukraine and the European continent. Bernard-Henri Lévy, you've recently come back from a tour in the United States where you presented your latest book titled Israel Alone. Ted, you've just arrived in Europe to sound again the alarm on the situation of Jewish communities on this continent after the shocking assault on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam. Israel alone. The diaspora alone. Actually, the Jewish people, or Am Israel, alone. As if Israel and Jews all over the world have merged this year over a common sense of loneliness. So I ask the question to both of you. Are we alone? Bernard, let's start with you.
I am back from a campus tour in the United States of America. I went in USC, in UCLA, in Columbia, in Ohio University, in Michigan. I was in many places. And in these places, in the campuses, it's not even a question. The loneliness is terrible. You have Jewish students, brave, resilient, who have to face every day humiliation, provocations, attacks, sometimes physical attacks, and who feel that for the first time, the country in the world, America, which was supposed to be immune of anti-Semitism. You know, we knew about anti-Semitism in Europe. We knew about anti-Semitism in the rest of the world. But in America, they discover that when they are attacked, of course there is support, but not always from their teachers, not always from the boards of the universities, and not always from the public opinion. And what they are discovering today in America is that they are protected, of course, but not as it was before, unconditionally. Jews in America and in Europe are supposed to be protected unconditionally. This is minimum. In France, since the French Revolution, in America, since Mayflower. For the first time, there are conditions. If you are a right-wing guy, you say, I protect you if you vote for me. If you don't vote, you will be guilty of my loss, and you will be, and the state will disappear in a few years. So you will be no longer protected. You are protected under condition that you endorse me. On the left, you have people on the left-wing side, people who say, you are protected under condition that you don't support Israel, under condition that you take your distance with Zionism, under condition that you pay tribute to the new doxa who say that Netanyahu is a genocide criminal and so on. So what I feel, and it's not only my feeling, it's the feeling of most of the students and sometimes teachers whom I met, is this new situation of a conditional security and support. And this is what loneliness means in America.
Thank you, Bernard. How about you, Ted?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, thank you, Anne-Sophie, and Bernard, it's an honor to be in conversation with you. It's interesting to hear you talk about America. Your observations track very closely the comments that I've heard since being in Europe from students in the UK and from students here who, speaking about America, tell me that their conclusion is that whatever the challenges they face here, and the challenges are real, that they feel fortunate to be in university in Europe rather than in the United States. But the point that you make that's so important everywhere is this sense that it's not only the Jewish community that expects to have unconditional security. For the Jewish community now, it feels as if expecting that security, the freedom to be able on college campuses, the freedom to be able to pursue their studies and grow intellectually and have different experiences, that when that security is compromised by those who wish to exclude Jews because they support Israel, for those who wish to tag every Jewish student as a genocidal baby killer, that when those positions are taken, the loneliness stems from the fact that they're not hearing from the broader community how unacceptable that behavior is, that it's become too easy for others to, even if they're not joining in, to simply shrug their shoulders and look the other way when what's happening to Jewish students is not just about Jewish students, but is fundamentally about democracy and values and the way of life in the US and in Europe.
Of course, except that the new thing in America, which is not bad, is that every minority has the right to be protected. Every community, every minority has the right to have a safe space and so on. There is one minority who does not have the same rights. The only minority who is not safe in America, whose safety is not granted, is the Jewish one. And this is a scandal, you know. We could live in a sort of general jungle. Okay, Jews will be like the others, but it is not the case. Since the political correctness and so on, every minority is safe, except the Jewish one.
So if we are alone, if American Jewish students feel known as European Jewish students, we are probably not the only one to feel that way, right? I turn over to you, Mr. Lévy, and go to another subject. Since day one of the Russian invasion, and even before that, you have been a forceful and advocate for a steadfast European and American support for Ukraine. Is Ukraine alone today, and will it be even more during America's second Trump administration?
I've been an advocate of Ukraine, absolutely, and I really believe that the freedom for liberty, the battle for liberty, the battle for freedom today is waged on two front lines. For the moment, it might be more, but Israel and Ukraine. I wish to make that very clear. It is the same battle. They are the same stakes, the same values, and the same enemy. I'm not sure that every Ukrainian, every Jews know that they have the same enemy. The axis between Iran, Putin, China, more and more Turkey, and the same axis of authoritarian countries. So it is the same battle. The Ukrainians, they have not been exactly alone. They have been supported in the last 2 years and a half, but in a strange way, not enough. The Chancellery, the West, spoke about an incremental support. Incremental support meant exactly what is not enough, what is necessary for them not to lose, but not to win. This is what I saw on the ground. I made 3 documentaries in Ukraine on the field, and I could elaborate on that a lot, precisely, concretely, in every spot, every trench. They have exactly what is needed for the line not to be broken, but not to win. Now we enter in a new moment of uncertainty in America and in Europe, with the rise of populism, which means the rise of parties who say, who cares about Ukraine, who don't understand that the support of Ukraine as the support of Israel, but is a question of national interest, a question of national security for us too. The Ukrainian ladies and gentlemen who fight in Ukraine, they fight for their liberty, they fight for ours, French, yours, American. And we might enter in a new moment. It's not sure, because history has more imagination than than mankind. So we can have surprises. But for the moment, I am really anxious on this front line too, yes.
There are additional connections, too, between what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Israel. And clearly the fact that Iranian killer drones are being used by Russia to kill Europeans should be an alarming enough fact that jars all of us into action. But the point that you make that I think is so important, Bernard, is that Israel has in many ways faced the same response, except with a much tighter window than Ukraine did. Israel was allowed to respond to the attacks of October 7th, that for those few days after the world understood the horrific nature of the slaughter, the rape, and the babies burning, the terrible, terrible mayhem, and recognized that Israel had a right to respond. But as with Ukraine, only to a point.
Even to a point, I'm not sure.
But then that point ended. It was limited. They could take that response. But now we've moved to the point where, just like those students on campus and in so many places around the world where only the Jews are excluded, that's a natural line from the geopolitical issues where only Israel is the country that can't respond in self-defense. Only Israel is the country that doesn't have the right to exist. Only a Jewish state is the one state that should be dismantled. That's another reason how these are, another way they are all tied together.
Don't forget that just a few days after Israel started to retaliate, we heard from everywhere in the West and in the United Nations calls for ceasefire, call for negotiation, call for de-escalation. Hezbollah did shell Israel for 1 year. We never heard one responsible of the UN call Hezbollah for not escalating. The day Israel started to reply and retaliate after 1 year of being bombed, immediately take care to escalation, please keep down, please keep cool, etc., etc. So, situation of Israel is a unique case. And again, if you have a little memory, I remember the battle for Mosul. I made a film about that. I remember the battle against the Taliban in 2001. Nobody asked the West to make compromise with the ISIS and with Al-Qaeda, which are the cousins of Hamas. Nobody asked the West not to enter here or there. No chancellery foreign outside the ground said, okay, you can enter in Mazar-i-Sharif in Afghanistan, but you cannot enter in Kandahar, or you can enter in the western part of Mosul, but be careful of this. Nobody had even this idea. This happened only for Israel. And remember Joe Biden asking the Prime Minister of Israel about Rafah, don't. At the end of the day, he's not always right, and he's often wrong, but the Prime Minister was right to enter into Rafah for obvious reasons, which we all know now.
Ted, let me come back to you more specifically on the US. At AJC, we support democracy. This is in our DNA since the organization was founded in 1906. We've been a strong supporters of the transatlantic partnership since day one. We believe in the alliance of democracies, in the defense of our common values. And you know, here there's a lot of anxiety about Donald Trump's re-election. So what is your take on the US election's consequences for Europe, for transatlantic relations?
I've been coming to Europe for years, I did as an elected official. Now in this capacity, our friends in Europe are always rightly focused on US policy and engaging the level of commitment that the US makes to Europe. The election of Donald Trump, this isn't a new moment. There is history. And for 4 years in the last administration, the focus that the president had on questioning the ties to Europe and questioning NATO and questioning the commitment that has been so central to the transatlantic relationship rightfully put much of Europe on edge. Now, as the president will come back into power, there is this question of Ukraine and the different opinions that the president is hearing. In one side, in one ear, he's hearing from traditional conservative voices in the United States who are telling him that the U.S. has a crucial role to play, that support for Ukraine is not just, as we've been discussing, not just in the best interest of Ukraine, but that it relates directly back to the United States, to Europe. It actually will, they tell him rightly so, I submit, that U.S. involvement, continued support for Ukraine will help to prevent further war across the continent. In the other ear, however, he's hearing from the America First crowd that thinks that America should recognize that the ocean protects us and we should withdraw from the world, and the best place to start is Ukraine, and that means turning our back on the brave Ukrainians who have fought so nobly against Russia. That's what he's hearing. It's imperative that starting this weekend, when he is here at Notre Dame, that he hears and sees and is reminded of not just the importance of the transatlantic relationship, but why it's important and why that relationship is impacted so directly by what's happening in Ukraine, and the need to continue to focus on Ukraine and to support NATO, and to recognize that with all of the challenges, when there is an opportunity for American leadership to bring together traditional allies, that should be the easiest form of leadership for the president to take. It's still an open question, however, as to whether that's the approach that he will take.
Thank you, Ted. Let me sum it up, our conversation for a minute. We said that the Jewish people feels alone, but we said that we are not the only ones. Didn't you feel that on that lonely road of this year, we've also never felt as strong as who we are? Both our Jewishness, a French intellectual I know, Bernard-Henri Lévy, knew well, Ben Lévy would say, our Jewish being, l'être juif, and Jewish unity, are they the best answers to overcome our loneliness? Let's start with our philosopher.
I don't believe only in Jewish unity, I believe in Jewish strength. And in one of my previous books, The Genius of Judaism, I spoke about that Jewish strength, not military strength in Israel, but spiritual strength. And I think that this strength is not behaving so bad. I told you about the campuses, I told you the dark side, but there is also the bright side, the fact that the students stand firm. They stand by themselves, by their position. They are proud Jews in the campuses. In Israel, Israel is facing the most difficult war and the most terrible war of its history. We know all the previous wars, and alas, I have the age to have known personally and directly a lot of them since 1967. This war, with terrorists embedded in the civilians, with the most powerful terrorist army in the world on the north, with the 7 fronts open, with Houthis sending missiles and so on, Israel never saw that. So, the people of Israel, the young girls and young boys, the fathers, even the old men of Israel who enlist, who are on the front, who fight bravely, they do a job that their fathers never had to do. So, resilience also in Israel. The most sophisticated, the most difficult to win war, they are winning it. And in Europe, I see, as I never saw, a movement of resistance and a refusal to bow in front of the anti-Semite, which I never saw to this extent in my long life. You have groups today in France, for example, who really react every day, who post videos every day.
Some are in this room.
Some are in this room. Franck Tapiro is in this room, for example, every day, about the so-called unbowed France, Mélenchon, who is a real anti-Semite, as you know. They publish the truth. They don't let any infamy pass without reacting. And this, again, is new. Not completely new, but I never saw that to this extent.
Thank you, Bernard. How about you, Ted? What do you think?
It's more important than ever that as Jews, as a Jewish community, as Zionists, that we don't allow our opponents to define what's happening. That that the response is never to feel defensive. That the response is to be boldly Jewish, boldly Zionist, unapologetically Zionist. To do exactly what those students are doing across the United States that I've seen. The students here who have that I've met with that in Europe, a student in London a few days ago said to me, she said, when someone yells at me, when they scream at me and accuse me of genocide, she said, it only makes me want to get a bigger Magen David. The person that stood up at a meeting in New York a few months ago who told me that announced in front of a big crowd that for years she's been involved in all of these different organizations in her community to help feed the hungry and to help kids to read and all these worthy causes. She said, since October 7th, she said, I am all Jewish all the time and I want everyone to know it. And Israel is perhaps the best example of this. It's impossible to imagine the kind of resilience that we see from Israelis. The taxi driver that I had in Israel, he said that this is so difficult for all of us. We all know people, we've lost people, it's affected all of us, but we're just never going to give up because our history doesn't allow it. We have prevailed as a people for thousands of years and have gotten stronger every single time.
Thank you, Ted. I can keep thinking about this overwhelming challenge that we face as the Jewish people today, which seems to confine us to solitude anyway. Jews and Israel are attacked with alternative truths, false narratives. We've witnessed how international justice, our common universal values, have been turned upside down. In the Jewish tradition, we say that we have a mission to repair the world, tikkun olam, but how can we make sure to recreate a common world in the first place?
It's one process. Number one, continue to try to repair the world. I remind you, and you know that, and Simone Rodin knows it also, in many occurrences, in many situations of the last 30 years, when real genocides happened, real genocide, not imaginary, real one, in Rwanda, in Srebrenica, in Darfur, where I met in Chad with Simone, and so on. The first whistleblowers, the first to tell the world that something terrible was happening, were not exactly Jews, but were ladies and men who had in the heart the memory of the Shoah and the flame of Yad Vashem. That's a fact. And therefore, they reacted, and what could be repaired, they contributed to repair it. Number one. Second observation about what Ted said. There is in Europe now, since many years, a tendency to step out, to give up, and to go to Israel. Not only by love of Zionism, but thinking that this is not a safe place any longer for them. I tell you, this tendency starts to be reversed. Now, you have more and more Jews in Europe who say, no. We built this country. We are among the authors of the French social contract, for example. We will not leave it to those illiterate morons who try to push us away. And this is a new thing. This reaction, this no of the Jews in Europe is something relatively new. And third little remark. 10 years ago in the States, I met a lot of young people who were embarrassed with Israel, who said, we are liberal, and there is Israel, and the two don't match really well. 10, 15 years ago, I met a lot. Less and less today. You have more and more students in America who understand that Israel should be supported, not in spite of their liberal values, but because of their liberal values. And come on, this, for a liberal, is a treasury. And it is unprecedented, and there is no example.
How about you, Dad? How do you think we can overcome the challenge of those parallel realities we feel we live in?
Those students, and I think broadly the Jewish community after October 7th, came to realize that as Hamas terrorists rolled into southern Israel, they made no distinctions about the politics of the Israelis. And that great irony, of course, is that the peaceniks were the brunt of these attacks living along the southern edge of Israel by Gaza. They didn't make determinations on who to kill based on how they practiced, what their politics were, how they felt about Bibi. And I think what the Jewish world, certainly it's true for young people that I talk to, came to realize is that connection between Israel and the Jewish people is not theoretical, that ultimately what's gone on for the past year is an attack against Israel as the stand-in for the Jewish people, and that defending Israel is really defending all of us. And I think they've come to understand that. But going forward, I think what you described, Bernard, it's a new, this is what it means now to be an Or L'Goyim. This is what it means to be a light unto the nations. That in the face of all of these attacks, that Israeli democracy continues to thrive. That the conversation by those, ironically, the conversation that has attempted to demonize Israel by demonizing Bibi has highlighted the fact that these protests have continued during the time of war, as you point out. That this is unlike anything you would see. That what's permitted, the way democracy thrives and is vibrant in Israel is different than every place else. That this is a message that the world will see. That in the face of these ongoing challenges, that the Jewish community stands not just against these attacks against the Jews, but stands against what's happening in the streets of so many places in America, where people march with Hezbollah flags, where they're openly supporting Hamas. It's going to take some time, but ultimately, because of the resilience, because of the strong, proud way that Jews are responding to this moment and to those protests, eventually the world will realize that standing in support of Hamas terrorism is not just something that is dangerous to the Jews, but puts at risk the entire world.
Thank you. I'm a Sephardic Jew, so I cannot just end this conversation speaking about loneliness. How about hope? Can we find some?
If I compare the situation of the Jews today to the situation in the time of my dad, for example, there was some change. For example, the Christians and the Catholic Church. 50 years ago, a huge cultural revolution in the world. It is the change of position of the Catholic Church on anti-Semitism. It was the Vatican II Council and the encyclic Nostra Aetatum. It seems tiny, but it is a huge revolution. And it consisted in a single word, one word. The Catholic Council of Vatican II said Jews are no longer the fathers of the Christians, as it was said before in the best of the case, they are the brothers of the Christians. This is a huge revolution. Of course, Catholics are not always faithful to this commitment, and popes, and especially the Pope of today, do not remember well the message of his ancestor. But on the whole, we have among the Christians, among the Catholics in Europe, and real friends. In America, among the neo-evangelical, I don't know if they are friends, but they are strong allies. Abraham agreements was again another big revolution, which has been underestimated. And the fact that the Abraham agreements, alliance with Morocco, Emirates, Bahrain, stands in spite of the war on 7 fronts is a proof. It is solid. It is an ironclad alliance, and it holds. And this is a new event. And we have not only in the top of the state, but in the public opinions of the Muslim world, we have a lot of people who start to be, who are more and more numerous to believe that enough is enough. Enough, too much war, too much misunderstandings, too much hatred, and who are really eager to make the real peace, which is the peace of hearts and the peace of souls with their other brothers who are the Jews. So yes, there are some reasons to be optimistic.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Ted?
I don't think that we can ever give up hope, and optimism is necessary, and I think justified. The things Bernard talks about, I mean, at AJC, our focus on building democracy, our focus on interreligious work, the work we've done with the Catholic Church around Nostra Aetate, now 60 years old, and continuing to build the relationship. Our Muslim-Jewish Advisory Council always looking for opportunities to find those voices that are tired of all of the war. And in our office in Abu Dhabi, we've continued to go to the Gulf, to the Abraham Accord states and beyond, even through this entire war, because there is the hope of getting to a place where Israel is in a more normalized position in the region, which will then change the perception and push back against the lies that those who wish to see a world without Israel continue to espouse. All of that is hopeful, and we work toward it. But for me, the most hopeful thing to come from this moment is AJC works around the world, and because the Jewish community now understands how connected we all are as a result of the threats that we face, the opportunity to strengthen diaspora Jewry, to help people realize that the connections between the Jewish community in Paris and the Jewish community in Mexico City and the Jewish community in Buenos Aires and Chicago and Miami and New York, that they're interrelated, and that we don't have the luxury of viewing our challenges as unique in our countries. By standing together, we're in a much, much stronger position, and we have to continue to build that. That's why AJC's Global Forum is always the most important part of the year for us, bringing together the Jewish community from around the world. It's why the Anti-Semitism Summit that we'll be doing here with the CREEF is going to be so critical to building those relationships. We have an opportunity coming out of this incredibly dark time to take the strength and the resolve that we feel and to channel it in ways that will lead the Jewish community to places that a year ago seemed absolutely impossible to imagine. Those 101 hostages need to return home. We stand together calling for them to return home. We stand together in our support of Israel as it wages the 7-front war. And ultimately, we stand together as Jewish people. That's what gives me hope every day.
Thank you so much.
If you missed last week's episode, be sure to tune in for the conversation between my colleague Benji Rogers, AJC's Director for Middle East and North Africa Initiatives, and Rob Greenway, Director of the Allison Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation and former Senior Director for Middle Eastern and North African Affairs on the National Security Council. They discuss the opportunities and challenges President-elect Trump will face in the Middle East.